This week, we want to give a tip of that to Kintronic Labs for their help in bringing us together, and Joshua King, the new president and CEO of Kintronic Labs. Tom has stepped down as president, CEO. He's still there. He's going to continue to work with the company, consult, and make sure that all the things that we have come to expect from Kintronic will continue. And we look forward to later this month, Tom will be with us and do a presentation to share some of his knowledge and such. Today, first of the month, it's Jeff Welton time, which I'm always happy, always appreciate when Jeff stops by. As I say, Jeff is our special guest today, and the thought we had in mind is before the output of the transmitter, but it's time to review our thoughts about maintenance of transmitters. You know, in the past, you had tube transmitters, and they required that you be there regularly, every week. And if you weren't, things happened. But since solid state transmitters have become the norm for most stations, we find fewer and fewer transmitter visits, some because of consolidation, some because of people being riffed. But the idea is that too many managers think that because it's solid state, it runs on its own and you never have to do anything. But that is not true. So Jeff and I wanted to talk about a few of the things that we should have on our list of maintenance issues and little tricks and tips of things you might not necessarily be thinking of, and how we can prepare to keep that transmitter running at its best. Jeff, what do you have to start with?
Well, I'm going to start with a horror story because it's no fun if we don't tell war stories. And it's more the why we've got to do this. I mean, you know, I've always beaten the drum on, you got to do the maintenance, you got to do the maintenance. And everybody kind of shrugs and laughs and says, and I've had some owners tell me, look, an engineer will cost me $50,000, $60,000 a year in a small market. A new 2.5 kilowatt transmitter will cost me $12,500. So, you know, I could replace the transmitter every year and still be less money than an engineer. I don't necessarily agree that that's the longest term thinking, but I'm not going to argue with his logic. At least he's actually taken an analytical look at it. The challenge becomes these days, you're not getting a transmitter next week, typically. Depending on what transmitter you're talking about, you could be talking, I mean, currently on our bigger boxes and most of our little ones, I'm quoting 12 to 14 weeks on lead times. And that was something that I wanted to, Barry, if you can enable the screen sharing, I've got a slide deck. It's only three wall of text slides that I would never have created on my own, but our purchasing people don't understand the constraints of PowerPoint. So I'll throw them up and they'll sort of be the backdrop for people to look at so they don't have to look at me while we're talking.
Jeff, you're just fine, except for
all right, screen two.
Getting a little white.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm not getting any younger. I hear that's kind of a trend in this industry, so I'm just trying to keep up. So this is an excerpt. I cut out a lot of, it was originally developed for in-house use. So this is what we use to inform our managers and the guy who pays all our bills when we get right down to it. And so I did cut out a lot of the proprietary stuff. There are some things in there that you don't necessarily, not that you don't need to know, you need to know, but what do they say? You don't need to know right now. But this is the things now. Logan and I will be doing a SBE webinar closer to the end of the month. I don't know whether it's a mentor webinar or one of the regular web extras, but just kind of keep an eye out for that. And this is one of the topics we'll be talking on. And everybody knows, I mean, anybody living near a car manufacturer has seen the parking lots full of vehicles waiting for radio chips or waiting for exhaust emissions controllers or. And everybody's heard about factory fires and COVID this and, port strikes. You pick a topic, there's something slowing stuff down. And it's getting a whole lot worse. And the problem is multiple. Cell phone production, 5G, all that great stuff is expanded way beyond forecast. That means that chip requirements are way higher. Well, cell phone companies buy millions of chips and transmitter manufacturers buy hundreds of chips. Who do you think gets the priority when the order goes in? So that's the kind of thing that we're looking at.
It's not only the chips. The
No.
One station that I know, I just had their Ubiquity microwave link die because the power supply died. And they called up their supplier and were told 100 days.
Yep. And that is actually pretty fast these days. And that's what you're going to see. And I mentioned it here on this slide, lead time, most of our components, most of the stuff we use to build transmitters, we're getting 1 year lead times on them. So I'm here to tell you, does anybody out there know exactly what they're going to buy a year from now? Because I guarantee you, I don't know what you're going to buy a year from now. And that means I can't forecast for our production folks, so they can't buy the part. So basically they guess based on what we've sold before and add 50% or so. There's a challenge because we got finance people too, and finance people don't like to pay taxes on stuff we're not using. And everything that sits in inventory has asset taxes. Every quarter, somebody's racking up a bill. So, it's, what do they say? Everybody, manufacturing and finance love just in time. Sales and support think it's the stupidest thing ever. And we kind of try and hit that fine balance. So that's one example. I know that just looking at us, for example, we've invested well over a couple of $1 million in maintaining inventory these days because of the lead times we're getting on parts. And it's not just like it talks about raw materials prices. The sheet of aluminum we used to pay, I forget what it was. Logan told me, and I, of course, right through the head, but it's roughly a 400% increase in the past 2 years on just the aluminum. The shipping containers are up almost 1,000%. To get a container from China to here used to be, I think he's got it, there it is, gone from 5K to 25K for a 40-foot container. So all that stuff is got an impact. Labor shortage. I mean, everybody's heard about it. Nobody wants to work for minimum wage. Don't blame them really. But especially when the government's giving you a couple $1,000s a month not to. So, and whether you call it politics, whether you call it good business, I don't care what you call it. What it means is that right now we don't have enough people to put the stuff in the boxes. Shipping, to give you an example on that, shipping right now, I'm quoting 4-week lead times just for delivery. From the time it leaves my dock till the time it arrives at your door, I'm going to tell you 4 weeks. Usually we'll do 10 days is what it takes to get from point A to point B, including all the people that have to hand it in between. And then it's going to sit in or very near your transmitter site for 2 or 3 weeks while they find a local mover that they trust, and that's a big deal, who can get it from there to into your building. And they're really, and again, same deal, really, really busy and don't have the manpower. So that's the horror story. Here is what we're looking at from all of our primary suppliers right now on parts. And for what it's worth, Micron sent an email out this morning and up their lead time to 40 to 55 weeks as of today. So yeah, this is not going to get any better anytime soon, and you need to be aware of that. It means that off-the-shelf replacements are going to become less and less of a likelihood. Now, I mean, I know us, and I saw Kirk Harnack in there and tell us, and everybody, and I'm sure Gates Air and the other transmitter folks, we all maintain shelf stock for support. But if it takes me a year to get the parts to build a transmitter and I only had a 6 month supply, then in about 6 months, I've got a challenge. So it's something you're going to see all across the board. Now, again, what we're doing, we're ordering, when we think we need this many, we order 3 times this many. So, we're able to mitigate it somewhat that way, but do understand that, if you've got a transmitter that flames out, odds are you're not going to get a full size replacement for it anytime in the next month or two. I mean, right now, an order coming in today, I'm quoting it for shipping at an AB time. So
You would
there's an
not tell
example.
us that Nortel transmitters would flame out.
Oh yeah. Barry, you know me better than that. I've been in tech support for way too long to tell you that my stuff's not going to break any more than anybody else's. Keep it cool, keep it clean, keep it well grounded. It won't break as often, but if current goes through it, eventually current will stop going through it. And all you can do is try to mitigate that. Keep the backups maintained. Keep backups. I mean, I make the argument, and I've made this argument for years, that if you replace a working transmitter as a scheduled upgrade, that's a great thing. But if you take that working transmitter out and turf it, and you don't have another backup, even if it's a low power backup at the studio, that's short-sighted. Make sure that you've got a backup. Yeah, we build the redundancy in, but eventually, there's going to be something go sideways. So just make sure you got something to keep it on the air, because I won't guarantee that we can get you a new transmitter. Like I said, I had a guy call me the other day. He goes, "You remember that Energionics you quoted me in June, or transmitter to replace my EO in June?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, the EO melted down, and Van said it would cost more to fix it than it would to replace it." And I said, "Well, that's a problem." He goes, "How fast can you get me a new one?" And I said, "April." And he sputtered and stopped. And I ended up, we got him a low power loaner for a couple of months, but he is going to be running at about minus 12 dB for the next 3 months while he waits for a transmitter to be built. So, just something to be aware of. And, I mean, I know I see some faces in here who are used to dealing with these sort of logistics. So, it's not, I don't think, a surprise to anybody that we are dealing with this. But the maintenance at this point is becoming, I think, more critical than it's ever been before. I mean, anybody else got thoughts on that?
Well, Marty's got his hand up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, guys. Hi, Jeff.
Hey, Marty, how you
Thanks,
doing?
Barry. I'm doing real well, thanks. It's real wet out here on the left coast of Washington State. It's pouring, pouring, pouring. We've had many inches, but that's a distraction. My question is, you guys have done, certainly Nautel has done a great job of reducing the number of physical buttons and knobs that are associated with transmitters. But how is the supply chain looking for buttons, knobs, connectors, ferrite, stuff like that, that is integral to the systems? How much time are those looking like relative to the chip aspects?
So Harold has addressed it really, really well in the chat comment about it being an unsustainable feedback system. Right now, we're seeing that stuff is maintaining okay. We are seeing some raw material shortages like aluminum, copper, sheet metal, things like that. But we've got so many sources of that who have inventory built up that I don't foresee that being a long-term challenge. Again, things like the ferrite beads, those are the kind of things that we tend to stock by the thousands anyway. So, I mean, right now I can tell you I've got about a 5-year supply of LXP 38s, the 3/4 inch inside diameter ones. I mean, last time I checked, we had 13,000 of them on the shelf. So, that's less an issue for us. It's more the what I call, and this is why it's an issue for us, because unlike a car manufacturer, where they may use 5 different radios across their entire product line, we have grand total in all our transmitters, we got 108 different circuit boards that we order from one supplier. So that one supplier will order, this month we may order 30 of this particular circuit board, whereas this company over there, this car manufacturer, ordered 20,000 receiver front end boards. So, given the setup time is the bulk of the cost for them, setting up to make 20,000 of something that you've got a higher margin on makes a lot more sense to them. So that's part of the challenge. It's more the manufactured stuff, but yeah, the raw materials are becoming an issue. I give you a prime example. I just bought a Kenmore gas stove. So gas cooktop, 6-burner, beautiful thing, love it. Like an idiot, I did something I shouldn't have done and melted one of the plastic knobs. We won't go that into the why of it. Let's just say I was doing something I shouldn't have been doing. So I go to Kenmore and they're like, oh no, we don't make that knob anymore. And I said, do you still make this stove? Well, yeah, but we only make it in stainless anymore. And so the knobs are all black instead of white, like your white one. So yeah, we don't have any. Well, where can I get them? Well, you might be able to get them from so-and-so. So I call so-and-so. No, we don't stock those anymore. Wasn't enough demand. So, we stock these generic. So I ended up ordering a generic off Amazon, and it took, about a month and a half to get there from China, coincidentally. But that's what we're going to see now. Hindsight being 2020, it would have been less expensive for me to buy a 3D printer and make my own. And that's probably what's going to happen, just because, well, everybody needs a 3D printer, right?
Jeff, I'm going to ask
Getting that way.
I'm going to ask you a question here, and if
Yeah.
you don't want to answer it, I understand. In the old days, it was a requirement. It was in the rules that you had spare parts, the certain number of tubes, certain number of whatever you needed to keep a transmitter on the air.
Right.
In my experience, in more recent years, stations are not buying the spares kit from Nortel or Harris or whomever. Is that what you're seeing?
Oh yeah, and to be brutally honest, I mean, our spares kit, and obviously I can't speak for the folks at Gates Air or LNOS or any of the other companies, but for us, when we design a new box, do a pretty intensive analysis looking at both the statistical mean time between failure for the component and the quantity, the component count in the box. And that's how we develop the spares kit. The challenge with that is you're going to spend $3,500, and of that $3,500, roughly $3,200 of it's just going to sit on your shelves. So I don't really, again, worst salesman in the world. I would rather push you to have a backup transmitter than a spare control board and a spare parts kit.
That makes good sense.
I mean, ultimately, I can get a 300-watt transmitter with a single bay antenna and just attach it to a telephone pole at the studio. You can rig the whole thing up for less than 2 or 3 times the price of a spares kit, at which point you've got a full backup facility that you can back up any of your stations with.
N+1. Yeah.
Right. So,
and a lot of stations have an old transmitter that they're replacing and just keep that in service.
Right. And I mean, in that case, throw in $3,000 for an MCI switch, a ton wall controller, and a couple of feet of hardline. It may not be the highest end, but if it's typically offline, it'll be there when you need it.
Yeah. Would you say the most frequently item needed, try to put a terminology to this, would be the filter, the air filter?
Well, I mean, the air filter is a known consumable. Fans, these are things that have a finite life cycle. We know they're going to fail. So yeah, you should keep, I mean, I've got a box. I mean, I run a forced air furnace here at the house, and I've got a box of a dozen furnace filters sitting outside. And, the voice of guilt doom, here, get her over here. This thing is very cheerfully once a month reminding me to change the furnace filters this time of year.
But every so often on the broadcast list, it's an email list, folks, for those of you that don't know, where professional broadcasters meet, and you can avoid hearing advertisements and things like that. But the question comes up regularly, can I go down to Home Depot and get a filter for my transmitter?
Yep. And the short answer for ours is it depends. A lot of them no, because they're custom sized based on whatever the hole happened to end up being in the rack, more by rack constraints and geometry than the actual planning ahead. Although we've had that discussion a few times, so hopefully in the future that'll be a little less an issue. It'll be a little more standard. But that said, you can call American Air Filter and they'll very cheerfully do them. Filters Plus, there's one other one I can't remember off the top of my head, but there are a couple of people that'll buy bulk standard size, the next size up, and cut them down for you for not a whole lot of money. So yeah, I mean, there are options. You can always buy them from us. I don't recommend that because, well, I mean, we're charging convenience store prices for this same reason. We got to pay somebody to inventory it, keep it on the shelf, and you know, we recover that in the price of the transmitter. But if you're ordering it outside the transmitter, you are going to pay more. This is the part where our marketing guys are rolling over. So, you know, for the record on the archive, folks, I didn't say it out loud, honest.
Well, it's a good point. It really makes sense because you can't, I think that, okay, the worst example I ever came across was in an old Collins transmitter. We had a multimeter switch 2x12 to drive a multimeter meter. It fried, called Collins. They wanted $159 for the knob to the little switch. And I came down to them at the NAB show and I said, what are you talking about? I bought this at Newark for $10.87. Well, no, we had to have it. We had it on the shelf and we charged our interest every year. Inflation would go up and our profit level. And I said, but $159? They said, yeah, that's about right. And
yeah. And I mean, when you think about it, and one of the things we do, and I don't know if we're all the same that way, we have graduated markups. So the more we pay for something, the less we mark it up. Because if I buy a resistor for 5 cents and sell it for 10 cents, well, I lost money on that because what we have to pay the inventory control folks, et cetera, and so on. But if I buy a transformer for $1,000, I don't need to sell it for 2,000 to recover that. So we do scale that a little bit, but absolutely. I mean, you know, we've got parts that have been sitting in bins in stores for the better part of 40 years, some of them.
I know that the folks that have had 802D exciters from Continental found out the hard way that 386 board
had to get me when I was taking a slurp of coffee when you said 802D, didn't you?
Yes, well, we're watching you. $600 for a 386 motherboard.
Yeah. And I mean, that's, again, you know, at this point, they've probably paid 2 times the actual cost of the board in asset tax. So, you know, the government always gets their share and they'll get it over and over and over again if you keep the part in stock. That's why it becomes such a challenge to keep the stuff moving through the facility, but still have enough to be able to get the job done. And when we run into a situation like this, and what started this ultimately, one of the biggest chip makers in the world in Japan had a fire. I forget the name of the company now, and Alex Hartman loves to beat me over the head with it because, again, like I say, of all the things I've lost, I miss my mind the most. But the company that makes about 90% of the ADC chips used in the market today had a fire. And so right off the bat, that slowed down. And then, you know, it becomes a cascading failure of just everybody. So some of the things we're seeing happen, and I think I mentioned it on a previous slide. Let me skip back here. One more to the beginning. There we go. One of the things we are seeing is a lot of the manufacturers, and Ford Motors would be an example, are starting to open their own semiconductor lines. So they've decided that for the volume they use, in a lot of cases, it's cheaper for them to make the chips themselves. And not so much cheaper, but I mean, one of the issues, you go down central Kentucky for a long time there over 2020, you'd see Ford, and I think it was Ford's, but pickup trucks parked waiting on chips for every parking lot you could find for miles. The challenge was by the time they were getting the chips, they were out of that model year. So, I mean, the truck is quite literally a used vehicle or previous year's vehicle before it's even come off the lot. And that's a challenge, so for them, that's massive lost revenue. We don't have that issue with transmitters, thank goodness. If we issued a new release every model year, we'd probably be having a whole different discussion there too.
Absolutely. Well, let's pivot here a little bit toward the maintenance aspect if we can. And where should a good tech look first? I've already mentioned the air filter, but where should the good tech look first in maintaining his transmitter?
So obviously air filters. It's funny you mentioned that, because just this morning in my Facebook memories, I brought up a picture of a exciter out of an ND5 that was full of mouse poo. And there'd be a prime example. Do a physical inspection on a fairly regular basis. There, John Van Milligan mentions filterbuy.com, and Gordon's got a great appliance part links, which I've already clicked just so I've got it open, because I'm going to be looking for knobs for the range as soon as we're done. But yeah, that's a physical inspection is, and this ties into what you were talking about with the ground audit. Because if your ground system is stolen, then you've lost your lightning protection and your butt's hanging out in the breeze, so to speak. So yeah, absolutely, physical more than anything. It's not looking at any specific part of the unit. I'll quantify. If you're running forced air, or you've got a tube rig with a squirrel cage blower and belt drive, then check the belts, definitely, because again, wearables, consumables. But yeah, beyond that, just do the physical inspection of the whole plant. I'd make a checklist if it was me, starting with entry points, walking inside on a bright sunny day, if Marty ever gets one on the West Coast again, and turn off the lights and look for all the places that critters could be coming in, stuff like that. After you've got that figured out, got the holes plugged, go through, sweep, dust, whatever. Again, it's going to depend on your facility. If it's sealed and air conditioned, that's not a problem. But at that point, then you want to go out and look at the evaporator coils and make sure that your condensers aren't blocking up or anything like that.
How often do you recommend that someone open the transmitter and dust?
Just answered that. Site specific. If you're sealed and air conditioned, you might get by. I've got customers that routinely go 2-3 years between cleanings, and at the end of 2 or 3 years, it's still spotless. I've got other ones running forced air with minimal filtering, where 2 weeks probably wouldn't be sufficient. So it really comes down to, and if you have that particular facility, then you definitely want to look at some positive pressurization and better filtering on the intake air. And, spend a couple of $1,000s to save you a whole bunch of pain later on. But having said that, when the inevitable happens, you can certainly call me to buy a new transmitter. So that's just, I told somebody, it's like I'm my own worst enemy, because I'm telling people how not to have to buy new transmitters, and that's how I get paid. But fortunately, they give me a lot of money for doing other stuff too.
The positive pressure thing is interesting, and a lot of buildings are cooled by bringing outside air in, and it's hard to keep that air clean, as opposed to having the building sealed and cooling the air inside. Or even better is the water cooling, and run have the cooling outside.
Yeah. And I'm good with either. It really depends on your local environment. Up here, I could run outside air quite easily, but if I was further south, then running a higher power where I'm generating more heat, I'd look at water cooling very hard, even just for building cooling. Now, having said that, if you are running forced air, the one thing that I like the best for that is a clean air room. You build a little 8x8 plywood shed or 4x8 plywood shed on the back of the building, basically cut out the back wall of the building and make it a wall of pleated paper filters, put bag filters on the air intakes, and bring in more air than you need to exhaust, and bang, you're done. Cost you $5,000, give or take, and you've got something that's going to keep your building clean and easy to maintain.
I know you've talked a lot in our previous discussions about having a little IR thermometer in your hand. of one sort or another, whether it be a Flair or other one.
There it is.
Okay.
Right beside me. Yep. I like those because, and that's less for transmitter maintenance, although you can use it there. You can use it on hardline. I like them for inspecting breaker panels the most. That's where, and as we're talking about in the comments, the red nut that, what does that red light mean? Pictures where the AC terminal is glowing. Typically, electrical connections are not supposed to glow. So, ideally, it's good to avoid that. It tends to be a whole lot more cost effective.
That's for sure. Anyone have a particular comment at this point that they'd like to share about maintenance issues that they have found that are important to remember? Jeff's
Hey,
point,
Yeah.
about making sure the whole building is in good shape is very important. Roof, don't want it to leak. I'm sure Marty is very cautiously careful about that right now. You don't want critters living in there.
Yeah.
You don't want a jammed air filter. What else? Anyone?
Hey, Jeff, I've got a question. Which Flair camera are you using?
So the one I've got is the Flair 1, and they brought it out and then they took it out for a software flaw. And the funny thing is I've never had an issue with this one. It's probably 7 years old now. Hold it up to the screen there. They have a new one. I think it's the Flair 1 Pro, and it's a ballpark. Last I checked, it was about $200. But it basically clips right onto the, they've got them for Android and iOS. It'll clip right onto the USB port on your cell phone, not this cell phone because it uses USB-C. But you can get them to clip right onto your cell phone and use the cameras in the cell phone within a thermal overlay.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Tim,
And
had your hand up?
Yeah, like Jeff said, one of the challenges that we have in a lot of these situations is that our broadcast facilities are in shared buildings. So you're at the whim of of whoever the landlord is. And in some of my stations in New Hampshire, the door doesn't even close properly. So I'm changing, I go to these sites once a month and I change the filters once a month because the intake of crud in some of these shared buildings, and that's the problem. And you can't control that, unfortunately. You can complain about it and maybe you can find the landlord, but in buildings where we were in control, like my AM in New Jersey, it was a closed air system. And even though we were in the swamps and you'd get all that shed from all the stuff in the fall, the transmitters would stay relatively clean.
yeah, no, the other thing you can do, and it kind of depends, again, it depends on your landlord agreement with respect to what you are and aren't allowed to do. But you could almost build a little clean air room around the transmitter, put a separately filtered high volume intake fan, just basically build an outhouse around it, so to speak.
I'll send you a picture of the site and you'll see why that things like
Yeah,
that are,
and that
I
happens
hear
too.
you. I hear you, but I can't do it. In two of these sites, it's like, if you turn sideways, you can't fit in the building. That's the
Yeah,
problem.
and that's it. I've run into those. We've got one it's the transmitter is in an elevator shaft at the top of a building. And we had to custom built a clean air box. So we walled off all the air intakes except for one, and then put a high volume fan on that one with a MERV 13 filter. Because in addition to the elevator carbon that's floating in the air, there's a compressor of 5 horsepower. I don't know. It's a massive compressor, air compressor. So there's a nice carbon dust and a misty oil floating in the air, which basically makes conductive glue. And so that one, all the air, again, we built a positive pressurization box to go on the back of the transmitter itself. Not the most inexpensive solution, but again, sometimes needs must. You do what you got to do.
We got a note here on the YouTube live stream from Marcus. He just got a Flair 1 Pro, just under $200.
Good. Yeah, that's what I thought they were. We did a little gizmos and gadgets thing right before Christmas, and that was one of the things that I brought up there.
Be interesting to have a extra filtering option for transmitters. I don't know if that would be a possibility of extra fine filter and then a blower adjustment or whatever to compensate for the increased pressure drop.
Well, so again, speaking for us, I mean, the one rack unit ones, which would be our 3.5, 5, 7.5, and 10. We did just that for one customer. So once we've done it once, that part already exists. I mean, to field retrofit wouldn't be an option because there were baffles and stuff involved inside the transmitter during manufacture. But it's certainly something going forward. The other thing that we do, and I'm pretty sure most manufacturers offer something similar, is you can get both open and closed configurations. Now, closed is where you're forcing air into the transmitter and ducting air directly out, and it has no free airflow within the room. It does require intake and exhaust fans, but that way you could duct the air directly to the box and filter it separately. Now, in a shared site like Tim's, that might not be an option because, again, the landlord might not allow you to punch holes in the wall to put in your own ventilation. But there are some situations where that could be beneficial.
We got a question here for you from Marcus, Jeff, about the VS series filters. And I'm going to ask you about something else on the VS when you're done with that.
So the VS series, for what it's worth, and you can scribble this down, they use a 20 pore per inch closed cell foam, 1/4 inch thick. You can buy that stuff by 4-foot sheets from several media manufacturers and just cut it to shape. For the VS one, that's what I do, and the one that I look after, you know, as opposed to, because in our case, we're buying the sheet and you're paying somebody at our place to cut it to shape. So, you know, it's certainly no hurt feelings if you do that.
Okay. On the VS and on some of the others, let's say, but the AUI, one of the things that you can monitor is the battery. And
Yes.
how often do you recommend they change the batteries?
Again, situational, because the battery's only used if the transmitter AC is off, and I mean totally off, no UPS connected, nothing. In that case, that battery should hold everything up for several months. So typically we recommend in the manual replace it once a year. In real life, I mean, my transmitter, we replace it every 3 years, and it is on a schedule. That's what we do. And I haven't hit a battery alarm on it yet. So that's going on. It's on its second, third battery now.
What's that battery do?
That particular one holds the operating status of the transmitter so that it comes back up when the power goes on, and it holds any latched alarms. So on the newer ones, it does a little more on the older ones, but you still should work if the battery's dead. You still should be able to, at the very least, to turn it on. It won't be totally dead, but you do run the risk if the battery's dead and the power goes out that it won't come on when you when the power comes back.
Oh, very good. Yeah, I used to just retired from doing stuff in cinema industry, and their batteries hold the encryption keys and certificates and stuff like that. We were using lithium batteries and had a real problem with the contact between the battery and the battery holder. We were only running around 10 microamps, and so we finally ended up soldering batteries in because the contacts just went bad. I couldn't get them to go to gold contacts on both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the kind of thing. I mean, we do a lot of work when it comes to that sort of thing, as far as both looking at what's cost effective now and looking at what's going to be the most reliable long term. And yeah, it's a juggling act sometimes. Some of this stuff gets fairly I guess fairly costly, fairly quick, and it's the ongoing challenge. And we've said this before. I mean, I can build you a transmitter that'll never fail, never go off air, but would you pay for it? Well, the answer has pretty much been resoundingly no. So yeah, that's exactly what we're looking at there. I'm just doing a quick check here. Scott had mentioned where to get the Flair one, and I thought if I can get this website to work, that I have a source for it. But yeah, I mean, they so $300 is what he's got. I'd say I saw it for $200 right before Christmas, but that may or may not have been a special. Yeah, 309 is what the Flair website's showing also.
After a couple of years of a site with a new transmitter install, I've always run a checklist for like inspections, every time I go out, which is usually once a week. And even though it's solid state, still, there's stuff that happens. The transmitters are fine, but there's a lot of other little things that are gotchas. So I've been updating this continually about for the last couple of years now. And one of the more recent updates after a gotcha was just something simple like check the flashlight that went on to the check. Is the flashlight working? It seems like a no-brainer, but they always fail when you really need them, and then you don't have spare batteries, and if you check your flashlight and you see it's getting dim or it's not working, then that's also a good time to make sure you got extra batteries stuff too. So
yeah, my wife.
Check the UPS. Check the UPS that's out there too.
Yeah,
I've been burned on those.
That's on the list. Yeah.
I got that call last week from a guy. He says, I've got the UPS interface, the transmitter worked, but the UPS died. And I said, well, you're only supposed to connect one exciter to the UPS. The other one should stay on the wall power, because it's not a matter of if it went UPS fails. It's just a matter of when. And again, I mean, one brand may be better than another. That's up to you. But yeah, I don't like to, what do they say? You don't put all your eggs in one basket. Talking about the checklist, again, I have the, got to unplug her before I say her name, but I have Alexa devices all over the house. And at noon on the first every month, they chime off with a list of about 5 different things: air filters, water one of my plants, check this, do that. And my wife just looks at me and she goes, your digital wife is nagging you again. But yeah, that stuff works. Do whatever works for you, whether it's a spreadsheet, whether it's a checklist there, reminders on your phone, whatever.
I've always said nothing beats eyes, ears, and nose for, because that's usually not on your remote control. So you walk in and you smell something that tells you something.
Give you a prime example that just happened, and it's part of the reason that I was late signing in. I came downstairs to the dungeon here in the basement to do this webinar, and I started sniffing, and it's like I smell burning electrical stuff. And that's not a smell I want to have in a wood frame house, at any time of year, but especially in the winter. So I start wandering around, and the boy had been using the central vac, and I'm not sure whether it's time to buy a new central vac or what, but that's where the smell was coming from. And yeah, eyes, ears, nose, absolutely. I'm seeing a battery that's getting close.
Thought you would note that.
Yeah. And those batteries, I mean, they're typical run volts. I want to say unloaded, usually they're about 3.18. So yeah, you're getting pretty close to due on that one. You're one good power outage away from that being a problem. Now, having said that, I mean, you know, it'll hold everything up down well below the orange section, but yeah, we build some buffer in, I just don't trust it.
Got to a site the other day, found this, which was normal, this, which was on the air. And I didn't find this first. I found that first.
Wow, somebody really cranked up the mod.
It wasn't turned on. It's just there for us, but it weighs 5 or 6 pounds. And the corners of that were little pieces of particle board that were glued to matching pieces in the box.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
I
a
think
serious modulation monitor.
had you been there, had you been hit by this, and I'm thinking as a heart patient on blood thinners, you get cracked in the skull and knocked out. It's like, okay, somebody would have been cleaning up my mess on the floor of that building before they got around to this.
Yup.
I'm like,
Yep.
okay, I'm rethinking hanging stuff overhead like that.
And that's one of the, I mean, that's a whole different discussion, but the safety things that you run into at transmitter sites are just astounding sometimes. I mean, I've walked into more sites than I can count where there have been loose pieces of Schedule 90 conduit just laying on the floor waiting for somebody to step on it and go for a ride. Or sites with open electrical panels. One site I walked into, and this is not too far up the road from where Ken's sitting, but I walked in and the phase are wide open and right beside the transmitter with about 1.5 feet between them. So if it was on air, you were really sucking in your gut to sidle around there and not, brand yourself with one of the coils. So yeah, it's just, I mean, it goes beyond astounding to frightening at some points. And that's
one of my
yeah.
clients in northern Maine had aluminum house entry wire for his transmitter, for his 10K tube transmitter.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just waiting for the building to burn down. It's all been replaced, but I was even afraid to work on it. And I'll work on anything up to 460. But, you look at this aluminum wire and it's like, how's your insurance?
I had a guy call me once and he said, do I need to use 10 gauge for this transmitter or can I use 12 gauge? And I said, that's a 50,000 watt transmitter. You better up the number just a little bit more than that. And he goes, well, I'll run a couple in parallel. And it's like, no, you will not. Well, maybe you will, but I'm not going to sign off on it. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be said for good engineering practices. And like Rich or Dave pointed out, I mean, with the speaker, I mean, sometimes it could be something that seemed like a good idea at the time, but particle board and glue go together, soak up a little moisture, and the next thing you know, they're not attached anymore.
There's even another point there that he brings up that I think is worth comment. I've been to too many transmitter sites, and I'm sure you have too, where you can't hear what's on the air. There is no speaker, no amplifier, no audio link of any sort. And
yeah. Now I've been to 1 or 2 sites where you'd probably be better off if there was no way to hear what was on the air, but that's a totally different discussion. And we won't get into my thoughts on dynamic range and 0.5 dB of it. Ken made a good point in the personal or in the chat, and I think he may have sent it private, but we won't sign off on a delta AC feed. Like if we know, and I'll quantify that. Closed delta is fine. 3 transformer closed delta, not an issue. If I know you've got a 2 transformer open delta, you can kiss your warranty goodbye. Unless you wire it single phase, we will not. Again, we won't tell you you physically can't, because hell, we're happy to sell you new parts as long as you want to buy them. But I can promise you that if you connect a 3-phase box to an open delta service, unless it's less an issue, although still a problem, transformer driven, you just don't have the phase-to-phase regulation. I mean, it's just a bad idea.
I see Dave Klein has his hand up.
Oh, yeah. Well, another thing on my checklist. And we're running HD, and so we have HD 2 and 3 also. And So yeah, I got a receiver out there, an amplifier, speakers. My checklist is make sure there's audio on all the streams. There's been times when there hasn't been. No, and nobody else seems to know, even though other people in the station are supposed to be monitoring it and supposedly have silence alarms and stuff. But,
so the funny thing,
it's just another one of those silly little things that you might catch something.
So we have this little 1 kilowatt, and it's analog only, so it's even easier to monitor. And it dutifully emails me on all the mod loss alarms, because we 30 volunteer hosts, and occasionally somebody will miss a cue by a long shot, or be on the phone, or be reading email, or. And so we were getting quite a few of them, and it's like, you can suggest, hey folks, you need to watch this. And when the program director started getting them, I think it really sped things up a little bit. But yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. If nobody's listening, how do you know if you're not on the air?
Well, somebody made the comment about going out to sites and not hearing audio. I've been to many studios where you didn't hear the audio until you got back in the control room. And sadly enough, our facility is one of those. People don't like to listen to it out in the rest of the building. I have it turned up in my office because I have to hear it. But
And I mean, it's an ongoing challenge. And I mean, I know Kirk's here and he could probably address it in more detail than I am. But I mean, these days between HD and just the delay through processing, listening to an off-air feed is a little challenging in the studio. But there is no reason, with all the silence sensing technology that we've got both externally and built into most of the transmitters these days, that you couldn't have notification for stuff like that. So yeah, it's again, it's the thing bringing in the revenue. Why are you not paying attention to whether or not it's there?
There can be issues with automation also. Problem we had with Radio Disney, may it rest in peace, in Los Angeles, was that nobody in the staff anywhere was being paid to listen to the radio station. And due to a traffic system glitch, the automation was dutifully playing the log for Sunday all the way through to Wednesday. And so we had wrong stuff on the air and nobody noticed. So other weird things can happen like that when nobody's actually listening.
Yeah. Yeah, there Brian's listening to two different streams. So I mean, you could always do the con stereo thing and put the same audio on both, but just offset it by about half a beat. And there's simulated separation. It'd be kind of cool.
but the listeners notice it.
Why
are you playing the same program?
Well, they didn't notice the commercial log, though. That was the problem. The music was still playing.
It's really sad to see
Neither
on
of the listeners
Broadcast
noticed,
Club
I
on
guess.
Facebook that a lot of comments about dead air. It seems to be the LPs, but I'm reading more and more comments on Facebook and the Broadcasting Club, and probably transmitter sites too, of guys that are driving around just listening to dead carrier, and that just makes me sad.
I mean, I will typically, anytime I go into a market, I'll listen to anything I know running my gear just to make sure it's all there. And yeah, there have been a few times when I'll pick up the phone and call somebody and say, hey, just to let you know, your HD2 is off. It was off when I got here Monday, and today's Thursday. It's still off. So yeah,
Recently,
it does
a friend
happen.
of mine just the other day, I was listening on a ham repeater. He was driving up the hill because the HD had failed on Christmas Eve. And this was January 2nd. He was going up because somebody finally noticed the HD was down.
And the funny thing about that, it's not that nobody noticed, it's that nobody complained. Because I mean, I know for me, if I'm listening to a station and it goes silent, I just hit seek, and I don't bother picking up the phone or anything like that. I've got things to do, places to go, people to see, et cetera, and so on. But I have a seek button, and it takes my wife is my metric for this stuff. And if you run more than 2 commercials in a row, she's hitting the seek button. If you have a DJ talking for more than about 30 seconds, she's hitting the seek button. If you're off air, you got 3 seconds before she hits the seek button. And it's been consistent for as long as we've been married. So she's my metric for all that stuff.
This
So
reminded me of an incident at KLOS we had. That people came from the control room. People were saying the audio was going out, in and out. And I said, what, because we weren't hearing it. Then suddenly a little light came on and I checked. And I don't remember exactly what the failure was, but the HD1 had lost audio, but the main analog was still working. So all the people in cars with HD,
It's 2 o'clock.
when they'd lose the, it would go in and out depending on whether they were hearing HD or analog.
yeah.
Easy solution for the temporarily was just turn the HD completely off. And that, of course, forced the radios back to analog till we could get it fixed.
We got a email just yesterday from Washington State about 2 stations. One, he says, has been a silent carrier for a few weeks now. And the other one is supposed to drop to 9 watts at night, but no longer bothers to power down.
Yeah.
And that.
Yeah, I gotta say that is more and more becoming a challenge too. So it's and I don't think that in most cases, I won't say all, but most cases, I don't think it's malicious. I just think that in a lot of cases, they don't have engineering staff anymore, and whoever has got the quote unquote chief operator assignment has needs a little education on what the rules specifically say. And again,
Or they don't care.
Or they don't care, or it's benign neglect and they just don't know that it's not shutting off.
Well, if you have 7 stations and you have a couple of HD carriers, it's a little hard for one person to do all the monitoring.
Yep. Oh, you can make it. I mean, now having said that, if 2 of them sign off at night, it's easy to click to them that night. But again, that would become a 7-day-a-week job. And, I love what I do, but I'm not doing it 7 days a week, no matter how much I like y'all.
Some years ago, I was doing backup for somebody, and in the middle of the night, someone ran into a power vault on the road. Power came back on, transmitter went back up, but of all things, the audio processor locked up. It was dead air till about 10 o'clock in the morning when somebody called and said, are you guys coming on today?
Yep. Yeah, just you come in, you fire it up, you're listening to the air monitor or the studio monitors, everything's good, and away you go, do the show, do the next show, and it's like, oh, we're doing great here, but nobody's listening.
They call it a perfect storm, I suppose. In this particular case, they had a silent sense on the program line, which was inoperative, and at the transmitter, they had a mod science modulimeter, but the HD, it never dropped below 26% modulation, so it never signaled.
At
We're hitting
WLIB, I had several silent sensors. I had them on the audio input off the telco. I had silent sensors everywhere. But the saddest part was the night of Hurricane Sandy, listening to WLIB just slowly die and then go off the air.
And not be able to do anything.
The next day and finding out that the transmitter building's got 6 feet of water in it.
Ooh.
But we heard it die.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're used.
Ken?
Oh, there used to be a famous station in Dallas, KVIL, with Ron Chapman, and they would do on-air testing stuff during the day, and he would run a contest, and he'd say, KVIL is going to go off the air. Stay listening to KVIL, and when we come back on, the person who gives us the exact time we were off wins $10,000. They never lost a listener.
Yep.
They burned up a bunch of feed line one year and said, okay, our AM's on, but that only helps the half of the county that can hear it. Tune to 103.7, and when we get back on, be the 103rd caller, we'll give you a car.
There you
and
go.
Of course, KVIL, they didn't have a backup transmitter for a long time, but they could go to their prize closets and come back with cars.
Yeah, you do what you got to do. On that note, it's pushing just a little past the top of the hour. I'm running late from the next meeting already. But that was the kind of thing that I wanted to beat on, was the fact that these days more and more, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. Our logistics people are forecasting late 23 into 2024 before we start to see lead times back to what we have traditionally expected. So just be aware that you're not getting a new anything right away typically. And it's a good argument to do some maintenance and, establish backup systems. If you're planning scheduled replacements, work that into the forecast, that you definitely don't want to order your transmitter 2 months before your CP expires.
Well, Jeff, it's always our pleasure to have you and your comments, and it's an opportunity to chat, to understand these things, and to raise questions. And so we do thank you for coming around.
My pleasure, folks. Have a great day. We'll talk to you all next time.
See you soon.